My name is Major Mara Ellison, MD, U.S. Army, formerly a forward surgical team trauma surgeon with the 10th Mountain Division, now an emergency physician at St. Gabriel Medical Center in Crescent City, California. War changes you, but medicine after war is its own battlefield. As a combat surgeon, I thought I had seen the worst death could do, but nothing prepared me for the night. I stood over a patient whose body defied explanation, a case so disturbing it demanded an autopsy. What we uncovered inside, no textbook, no tour in Afghanistan, no ER training ever prepared me for. The night smelt like wet metal and redwood bark, the parking lot shining with a skin of marine drizzle, foghorns thudding from the harbor like a slow, indifferent heart. Inside, the ER kept its own rhythm. The steady telemetry chirps, the fluorescent droning that flattens shadows into tired ghosts, the rubber hush of souls, the astringent bite of alcohol wipes layered over disinfectant and human fear. My night crew were in that concentration trance you get around 2300, when the early evening chaos burns down to embers and the real storms move in. Diaz checked laryngoscopes with the reverence of a mechanic before a long-haul run. Tara counted syringes with a calm that could lower your blood pressure by being in the room. Beecher clicked ECG leads into neat coils and asked me, without looking up, if I thought the rain would keep the drunks indoors this time. I said yes, which is a wish disguised as a prediction, and then the base radio cracked open with a voice I didn't recognize. Steady, but with a thread of hesitation. Female in her 40s, found unresponsive at home, agonal respirations, hypotensive, oxygen saturations in the 70s, on non-rebreather, ETA, 8 minutes. A good voice leaves space for questions. This one left a gap that felt like a warning. Trauma Bay 2, I said, and the team moved as if the floor nudged them forward. Full PPE, respiratory ready. Keep the hazmat cart parked just outside the door. I didn't have a specific toxin in mind, only that old prickle at the base of the skull, a reflex carried home from dust-colored tents where the air sometimes bit back. When the bay doors swung, the cold from the ambulance dock came in with the gurney, along with a smell I didn't recognize at first because it wore a polite mask. Sweet in the way overripe citrus is sweet, a candy left on a car dashboard until it leaks its memory into the upholstery, then metallic like wet pennies pressed under your tongue, then something solvent sharp that climbed the back of the throat and made the nasal passages feel thin. The patient's skin had an oily sheen that was not sweat. It caught the overhead light and broke it into soft, wrong little rainbows. She was compact, mid-40s, olive undertone turned waxen, a crescent of black hair pasted to her cheek with water or oil, mascara smudged into a bruise beneath her right eye. The paramedics' gloved fingers slid a little on her jaw when they tried to open her airway. SpO 276% on the mask, BP 68/40, HR 128, respiratory pattern that was more reflex than breath. Pupils 3 millimeters and slow to care. Diaz stepped in to assess and flinched almost imperceptibly. Not dramatic, not for show, just the body's honest recoil before the mind edits it. "What is that smell?" he said, low enough that if you weren't listening you could pretend you hadn't heard. "Airway first," I said, because the list is sacred when you're standing on a cliff. I slid the laryngoscope in, and the oropharynx looked pale and slick, vocal cords the color of wax. Tube passed clean on the first attempt. The capnography trace rose like a small, golden promise, square waves with the faintest wobble, a sign the lungs were going to make us pay for our wins. Tara pushed etomidate and rocuronium by memory of dose. Beecher squeezed the bag and frowned, like the compliance offended him personally. "Sticky," he muttered. We taped the tube, but the tape wanted to peel, the oily film arguing with adhesion, and Beecher had to clean her cheeks twice before it would stay. We hung norepinephrine and titrated up, started fluids with a suspicion, born from too many nights, where a generous leader turned already drowning lungs into lakes. Crackles rolled under the stethoscope like pebbles pulled back by tide. I asked for a VBG, a lactate, CMP, CBC, osmolality, toxscreen, carboxyhemoglobin, methemoglobin, and for a tech to draw cholinesterase, because the top of my mind said improbable, and the bottom said you don't get to be cute about this. Even as orders left my mouth, I was studying the sheen, the smell, the way the standard stories didn't quite fit. The second EMS unit arrived with family in tow. Husband and a teenage girl with chipped blue polish, both in that stiff, polite shock where you stand up straight and answer questions because you've been raised right and haven't yet given yourself permission to break. She was in the bathroom, the daughter said, eyes on my collar instead of my face. She had the sauna on. She puts her oil on before, said it helps circulation and pain. Then she said she felt weird. She slid down against the tub and made this sound like she stopped and pressed her knuckles to her lips. She didn't need to finish. I have heard that sound, the wet, primitive honk of air trying to be life when the machine is quitting. The husband, a fisherman by the callus pattern and the wedding ring's deep groove in flesh, held up a canvas tote stamped with a lotus and the word elixir in a font that had never known medical school. He fumbled out a brown glass bottle with a pump top. She uses this, he said, offering it like a parable and a confession. The label promised relief with a cheerful list of ingredients that would give any toxicologist hives. Methyl salicylate from wintergreen, camphor, menthol, eucalyptus, DMSO, and a proprietary blend of circulatory botanicals. Something cold slid behind my sternum and put a hand between my shoulder blades, gentle but insistent. DMSO dragged up old morbidity and mortality reports, and low-voice stories passed between emergency physicians like lucky coins, cases where solvents ferried other chemicals through skin like smugglers, cases where the air around a body became a second patient. The daughter saw my face and misread it as judgment. "It's natural," she said, defensive because the word is a talisman. "It's better than pills." She hates pills. "I'm not judging," I said, and meant it. I need to know what she used so I can help her. The monitor bleeped in that polite but insistent language it uses when it wants your eyes. Her heart rate climbed and the blood pressure made a low, flat sound in my head that had nothing to do with the machine. We rolled her for a portable chest x-ray, and it showed what our ears already knew. Fluffy, unfair whiteness that looked like storm surf. We gowned and gloved and rinsed her torso with warm water and mild detergent. Minimal friction. A quick and dirty decon that felt inadequate and mercifully was all the time she'd allow. The smell softened but did not capitulate. It floated above us in a shimmer my brain treated like a second set of numbers. Diaz coughed once, twice, a clipped bark, like he'd swallowed a small truth. Beecher blinked hard and moved his face away from the bed's thermal currents, then pretended he was reaching for tape. I had one memory from Afghanistan that kept looping itself into this room. A chlorine canister cracked by mortar at a market. A greenish ghost in the air that made our eyes run and our lungs feel like we'd inhaled fine nails. The way you keep working and hate the world in equal parts for asking. The lab numbers began arriving in confused parade. Severe metabolic acidosis with an anion gap that suggested a poison was telling us a story in a language we barely knew. Lactate climbing without a trend to love. Troponin innocently flirting with the high end. Carboxyhemoglobin normal. Methemoglobin normal. Salicylate level not shouty but not irrelevant in the context of methyl salicylate on skin. Osmolality came back, and the gap between calculated and measured opened like a door I didn't want to step through until I had company. I ordered sodium bicarbonate because sometimes pH is a battlefield you can at least pick a trench in, and I watched her EtCO2 climb and fall in a rhythm that felt personal. "Do we call poison control?" Tara asked quietly, which was her way of telling me she wanted the cavalry. "Already on," I said, because the number lived in my head the way a radio frequency used to. I told the operator what we had. A middle-aged woman. Skin oily with a compound listed as DMSO plus methyl salicylate plus camphor / menthol / eucalyptus. Respiratory failure. Pulmonary edema. Staph with mild upper airway irritation. The voice on the other end didn't gasp. They never do. They walked me through what I was already doing and offered what they could. Decon, supportive care, avoid friction and heat, prevent secondary exposure, consider the possibility of transdermal transport of other toxins from the bathroom products we hadn't bagged yet, keep an eye on the team. I was already doing all of that, and it still felt like not enough. The husband hovered at the curtains like a man waiting for the sea to tell him if it will return what it took. I asked him to list every product in the bathroom. Bath salts, essential oils, anything that promised relief in cursive. He named eucalyptus bath crystals, peppermint foot rub, a jar of something called herbal balm with capsaicin, and the elixir oil. The daughter said, "She takes sauna every night. She says it helps her heart." Is this our fault? The worst part of medicine is that truth delivered clean can still cut. "No one is blaming you," I said, "because blame is lazy and grief has enough to carry. We're trying to understand what happened so we can treat it." The portable CT scanner became a compromise with the universe. We sent her not because I believed it would save her, but because ruling out hemorrhage and catastrophic intracranial events is the kind of housekeeping the dead are very strict about. The corridor to CT smelled faintly of saline and warmed plastic. We squeezed the bag and kept pressers humming and watched the numbers like supplicants at a shrine. Back in the bay, the monitor took on that tone you learn to hate, a watchful, waiting flatness between beeps. I pressed my stethoscope to her chest again, an act of faith or superstition, and heard the ocean where lungs should be. Diaz coughed again and waved a hand, the universal symbol for don't fuss. Beecher dabbed the inner corner of his eye with the back of a gloved knuckle and said he'd gotten dust. There was no dust. I told Tara to move the family out toward triage where the air wasn't holding its breath. "We're doing everything we can," I told them, which is the truth, and also an apology for how small that can be. I kept feeling the tug of an old tent flap in my memory, the grit in the tea, the taste of the desert in your mouth even when you haven't breathed it for years, the way certain nights make you 15 people at once, doctor, soldier, mechanic, priest. When you work long enough in emergency medicine, you start to recognize when a case has decided to be a story, and not the kind that ends with a neat teaching point. The smell sat in the room like a question mark with a pulse. The oily sheen made adhesive a negotiation. The numbers wrote a letter in a hand I could almost read. I ordered another gas, asked for serum osmolality to be repeated, sent the elixir bottle down to the lab, sealed and signed, because chain of custody is how you talk to the future, and told Diaz to take a 5-minute lap outside, even if he insisted he didn't need it. He went and came back with fresh air on his scrubs like aftershave, and a stubborn look that said he'd rather be sick than sit out. When the X-ray tech pushed through to retake a view, she paused at the doorway and sniffed, the way an animal does when the wind changes. "Everything okay?" she asked, an honest human question that acts like a lid on a pot about to boil over. "We're taking precautions," I said. "Short exposures, masks on." She nodded and did her job anyway, because that's what we do. In the corner, the daughter curled into her sweatshirt and stared at the floor, where tape and saline left small constellations. The husband clenched and unclenched his hands, fisherman's hands used to fighting lines that go taut without warning. I kept thinking, if the air in this room is a patient, I have to treat it too. And beneath that, the quieter thought I didn't invite but which came anyway. I've smelled this genre before, halfway around the world, and the last time it taught me there are nights when even the air has teeth. I wish I could say the scan gave us something, anything to hang our hats on. No hemorrhage, no edema, No mass waiting like a loaded gun. Just a clean head CT, which in this case felt less like good news and more like mockery. We rolled her back to the trauma bay, her skin slick under the sheets no matter how many rinses we attempted. The ventilator pumped obedient sighs, but her chest rose reluctantly, as if the air inside the room had to negotiate with her lungs first. The blood gases returned, each one a contradiction in the flesh. pH dropping despite bicarbonate, lactate climbing without a clear cause, osmolar gap widening, anion gap stubbornly screaming at me. Electrolytes wandering but not enough to explain collapse. Carboxyhemoglobin still normal, methemoglobin still normal, cyanide negative. Everything in the book was saying this is not what you think it is, and yet my instincts whispered the opposite. You've seen this shape before, you just can't name it. Diaz pressed a hand against his sternum and cleared his throat. I'm fine, he said again. That automatic soldier's answer, but the rasp in his voice betrayed him. Beecher's eyes had reddened, and he blinked furiously at the monitor, as if it were responsible. I could feel something too. Not a cough, not a burn, just a prickling awareness that the room itself was trespassing. I told Tara to increase airflow, bring in a portable filter, crack the doors even though it meant sacrificing a controlled environment. Masks up, I ordered. No exceptions. My voice sounded like my own COs from Afghanistan, back when we thought discipline alone could keep the world from dissolving around us. The daughter watched through the glass, knuckles white on the rail, her blue chip nails pressed so hard the paint fractured further. She was murmuring something, maybe a prayer, maybe just her mother's name. The husband stood behind her, still gripping the tote bag like a life preserver. I knew from his posture, shoulders back, feet planted like he was bracing for a wave, that he was a man used to storms. But this storm wasn't one he could ride out. We pushed another round of pressers. Her blood pressure flirted with numbers that looked like hope and then slipped away again, cruel as a tide pulling back before a drowning. Heart rate bouncing between tachycardic panic and a sluggishness that hinted at surrender. I leaned down, close to her face, even though the smell crawled into my throat and made my eyes water. Stay with us, I whispered, though she couldn't hear, though she was sedated and tubed and drifting somewhere beyond. Words like that aren't for the patient, they're for the doctor who needs to pretend someone is listening. Her monitor alarms broke into that shrill chorus that no one mistakes for anything but death approaching. The first code came sudden. VFib, chaotic, angry. We shocked, compressions pounding against the oil-slick skin that made even gloved hands slip. We got her back, heart grudgingly returning to sinus like a soldier stumbling to his feet after being knocked flat. But the rhythm carried no gratitude. 15 minutes later, the second code. This time, asystole, a flat refusal. We worked her hard, EPI, compressions, bicarb, every tool in the chest. A faint rhythm crawled back, fragile as a spider's thread, but her blood pressure refused to follow. The third time, I knew before the alarms sang. You learn to feel it. A stillness before the wave. A hush in the body that says it's about to go. The flatline came, and though our hands moved on instinct, compressions, shocks, drugs, there was no echo from her, no fight left. I looked at the clock. 2:47. Call it, Tara said softly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was mercy dressed in clinical language. Time of death, 2:48. The husband's face collapsed without sound, like a structure imploding. The daughter made a keening noise that broke something in my ribs. I walked to them, still reeking of the smell that no shower could yet erase, and said the only thing I could. I'm so sorry. We don't know what happened yet, but we will find out. The husband shoved the elixir bottle into my hands. It was this, wasn't it? Tell me it was this. His voice was jagged, desperate for a villain. I can't tell you that yet, I said. We'll send it. The medical examiner will test everything. We'll have answers. Lies of process. because sometimes the answers never arrive. Behind me, Diaz leaned on the counter, coughing again, trying to hide it. Beecher rubbed his eyes like they were dry, but I saw the water in them. The room wasn't safe, and we all knew it. I ordered the body sealed, decon procedures extended to everyone who touched her. I logged the chain of custody for the oil, sent the labs, and made the call to the medical examiner. Unexplained death, I told them. Possible toxic exposure. Staff symptomatic. There was a silence on the other end, longer than professionalism allows. Finally, we'll take jurisdiction. We'll need the product. Can you be available for the post? Yes. The word felt like a stone in my throat. By the time I stripped off my gown and gloves, the room smelled less like medicine and more like memory. That sweet metal solvent note hung in the vents, soaked into our scrubs, riding home with us like an unwelcome passenger. I drove back through Crescent City's empty streets at 0400, fog hugging the harbor lights, rain streaking the windshield. My hands shook on the wheel. I'd spent years in a war zone, suturing arteries with mortars thudding outside, breathing in fumes that clung to your lungs for days. And yet, this quiet domestic bottle with its Lotus logo and its promise of relief terrified me in a way even combat never had. Because combat is honest. You see the gun, you hear the blast, you smell the cordite. Death in war is a roar. But this was a whisper that seeped through skin, through air, through tape that wouldn't stick. And I had the sickening certainty that the night wasn't over. Tomorrow I'd be standing over her again. But this time not as a doctor fighting for her life, this time as a witness to the secrets her body refused to keep. The morning after, Crescent City still wore its fog like a funeral veil. I hadn't slept. Couldn't. My shower scalded, soap layered thick, but the smell still lived in my sinuses. I drove to the California State Medical Examiner's office with the windows cracked, the damp harbor air pouring in, gulls tracing wide circles over the breakers. I had told myself 100 times overnight that what we'd experienced was explainable, cataloged, reducible to chemistry. But each repetition felt like a lie rehearsed for my own ears. The Emmys building squatted in the industrial district, low and square, its windows narrow, its parking lot empty at that hour. Inside, the air was colder than any hospital's, overconditioned, filtered, scrubbed into sterility. It was the kind of cold meant to keep death from spoiling. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flattening every corner into the same gray pallor. The smell here wasn't bleach, wasn't antiseptic. It was a metallic, refrigerated neutrality, as if the air itself wanted no memory. Dr. Margaret Sloan greeted me in the corridor. She wore her hair iron gray and coiled into a knot that looked carved, not tied. Her eyes were steady in the way that makes people confess even before they intend to. She had the kind of presence that didn't need introduction. "You were the attending last night?" she asked. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded scraped raw in this place. "You said staff experienced symptoms." "Minimal," I told her. "Cough, throat irritation, eye burning. No collapse. We deconned fast." She nodded once, clinical acknowledgement without judgment. "And the product?" I handed her the elixir bottle, sealed, bagged, chain of custody form clipped. She read the label without changing expression. "DMSO," she said, as though it were an old acquaintance. Then, with the same flat tone, "That explains nothing. And everything." We gowned, we masked, we stepped into the autopsy suite. The refrigeration hum deepened, the walls reflecting sterile light. The gurney waited at the center, draped in a white sheet that already seemed to hold a secret. I had stood over countless bodies before, soldiers, civilians, patients, but here the air felt heavier, as though it knew what it was about to reveal. The technician was a man named Drew, broad-shouldered, kind-eyed, the sort who might coax plants to grow by talking to them. He set out instruments with the careful choreography of someone who does this every day and refuses to forget the respect owed to the dead. Dr. Sloan began the external exam, her voice calm and measured for the recorder. Female, mid-40s, no external trauma. Notable for faint gray-green discoloration of fingertips and perioral region. Persistent oily residue on chest and neck. I stood at her shoulder, and the smell drifted up, not as strong as last night, but distinct. The sweet metal solvent note. Softened, watered down by refrigeration and time, but still there. My stomach clenched around it. Drew shifted, clearing his throat. Feels prickly in here, he muttered. Step back if you need to, Sloan said. He stayed, but I saw his jaw tighten. We opened the chest. A faint shimmer of that same odor rose with the first incision, and the air above the body changed. It wasn't dramatic, no plume of gas, no visible reaction. But something shifted. The way a room feels when oxygen thins at altitude. Drew coughed twice, short barks, rubbing his throat. Sloan ordered him out, not unkindly but with command. He went without argument, and the silence he left behind was louder than his cough. The lungs were heavy, sodden. Pulmonary edema of the kind that looked like tissue had been turned to sponge. Sloan lifted them with effort, weighed them, dictated the numbers. I thought of surf pounding the Crescent City breakwater, relentless, filling every crevice with water. The heart lay pale, the coronary smooth, almost too clean for a woman her age. No rupture, no blockage. Just a diffuse pallor that made it look less like an organ and more like a wax cast. The liver gleamed with a peculiar bronze sheen under the lights, neither jaundice nor health. Sloan paused over it, adjusted the lamp, and said softly, "Unusual coloration. Photograph." The camera clicked, the flash a sterile imitation of lightning. The blood we drew from the vena cava looked wrong, even in the basin. A faint brown tint, thicker than it should be, its viscosity sluggish, like a river carrying silt. Sloan dipped a gloved finger, rubbed it between thumb and forefinger, and gave a slight shake of her head. "Something's here," she murmured. As she incised the pericardium, a new note rose in the room. Not stronger, but different. An almost sweet top note layered over the metallic solvent. It was faint, fleeting, but unmistakable, like the moment a new instrument joins an orchestra you already don't understand. Sloan paused mid-motion, met my eyes. We didn't speak, but the look said everything. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Are you remembering the same whispered stories? The room felt thinner then, as if the air itself was warning us. I felt pressure in my sinuses. The same kind of subtle intrusion I had once felt in Afghanistan when a chlorine shell cracked open and the desert wind delivered its sting. We increased airflow. We checked our masks like pilgrims checking charms. We continued. Because the dead require finishing. We found petechiae in the lungs. Mild gastric erosion, but no pills, no trauma, nothing overt to hold responsible. We sealed samples carefully. Toxicology requested everything. Blood, urine, tissue, gastric content, even a scrape of the oily residue. The elixir bottle was logged again, locked in evidence. By the time we finished, I felt an ache behind my eyes, as if the smell had climbed into the folds of my brain. I stripped off my gown, mask, gloves, but the odor clung anyway. In the hallway, I leaned against the cool wall and let my breath come slow, careful. I had seen men bled out by IEDs, women burned alive in vehicles, children crushed in rubble, but this quiet, insidious invasion that turned a woman's body into a riddle, dangerous, even in death, unnerved me more deeply. Sloan emerged, pulling off her gloves. "We'll have to wait for talks," she said. Her tone was flat, but I caught the smallest tremor at the edge of her voice. I nodded, unable to trust my throat. That night, when I closed my eyes, I didn't see blasts or blood. I saw oily rainbows glistening on skin under fluorescent light, and I smelled that sweet metal note rising from a chest cavity, as if the body itself had secrets it wasn't done telling. And I knew, with an old soldier's certainty, that the answers wouldn't come clean. The toxicology reports trickled in like reluctant witnesses, days stretched into weeks. Each result closed one door and left another swinging open. Cyanide negative. Carbon monoxide normal. Methemoglobin levels stable. Cholinesterase barely nudged. Not the profound drop you'd expect if organophosphates were to blame. No barbiturates. No opioids. No hidden pharmaceutical saboteurs. Yet the numbers that mattered told a different story. The osmolar gap persisted. Small but undeniable, a shadow cast across her chemistry. Elevated sulfone compounds appeared where they had no business existing. Breakdown products that whispered of solvents, heat, and something carried across skin into blood. I sat with the report one night after shift, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and read the line again and again. Elevated dimethyl sulfone, the tidy cousin of DMSO. The trace it leaves when oxidized in the body. Proof that the solvent hadn't just kissed her skin, it had crossed the threshold, made itself at home. The theory began to form, brittle as glass but sharp enough to cut. DMSO applied in heavy quantity, rubbed across the chest, heated by a sauna, combined with methyl salicylate, the wintergreen oil potent enough to poison if concentrated. Add camphor, menthol, eucalyptus, a cocktail of chemicals that alone might irritate, but together, with DMSO as their carrier, could march straight through skin and into blood like soldiers smuggled past a border. But theory is not closure. When I met with her husband and daughter again, I carried the weight of those papers like a stone. We sat in a conference room meant for bad news, beige walls, motivational print, a box of tissues already half empty. The husband stared at the table, calloused fingers kneading each other, his fisherman's hands useless on dry land. The daughter curled into herself, sweatshirt sleeves pulled down over her knuckles, nails bitten now to the quick. I explained what we knew, that her body absorbed chemicals from the oil, that heat accelerated absorption, that her lungs filled with fluid because her heart and chemistry couldn't withstand the storm. I explained what we didn't know, whether it was the methyl salicylate in lethal concentration, whether it was a reaction of compounds, whether her body had some vulnerability we couldn't map. The daughter asked the question all children ask when the world comes undone. Did she suffer? My throat tightened. I told her the truth I could give. We did everything to keep her from pain. When she died, she was asleep. It wasn't the whole truth. The body had suffered, no doubt. But mercy sometimes requires edits. The husband lifted the elixir bottle, his grip white-knuckled. She trusted this. She said it was natural. Natural means safe, doesn't it? His voice cracked on safe. I wanted to tell him that arsenic is natural. Cyanide is natural, death is natural. Instead, I said, natural isn't the same as harmless. She believed it would help her. That belief is not her fault. After the autopsy, the ER changed in ways only the staff noticed. The hazmat cart moved closer to the trauma bays. A new protocol was written. Any unknown odor, any oily residue, masks immediately, filters engaged. No debate. Diaz started keeping menthol rub in his locker, swearing it helped him fight off the phantom sting he still felt some nights. Beecher stopped joking when families mentioned essential oils. Tara began washing her hands with an intensity that bordered on ritual, scrubbing long after the smell was gone. As for me, I started asking new questions in triage. Not just, what meds do you take, but what rubs, oils, tinctures, baths. Because people bring their remedies with them, sewn into their skin, disguised as comfort. Rumors spread quietly in Crescent City. A woman dead from a mystery oil. A hospital staff nearly poisoned. A family broken. In a town this size, stories crawl under doors like fog. Patients whispered it back to us, asking if it was true, if the ER was safe. We answered as best we could, yes, we're prepared. But safety is never a guarantee, only a promise you try to honor. At night, when the harbor air turned metallic and the fog pressed against my windows, I smelled it again. Not real, not chemical, just memory's cruel echo. It climbed into my dreams, pulling me back into the trauma bay, into the autopsy room, into the moment when Dr. Sloan paused with the pericardium open and that strange, sweet top note rose from the body. That detail haunted me most. The suggestion that the body still had one more secret, one more insult to give, even in death. What terrified me wasn't just the chemistry, wasn't just the fact that a brown glass bottle from a bathroom shelf had killed a healthy woman. What terrified me was the silence of it. War at least has the honesty of blasts and screams. This was quiet. It seeped. It whispered. It disguised itself in promises of health. I would tell myself, that night after night, war roars, but medicine whispers. And sometimes, the whisper is worse. It has been months since that night in Crescent City, yet the case follows me like a shadow that refuses to fall behind. I have treated countless patients since then, stabbings in alleyways, heart attacks in diners, overdoses in motel bathrooms, but nothing has pressed into me the way she did, slick-skinned and gasping, wrapped in the sweet metal scent of something we still can't name with certainty. People ask me about war, about Afghanistan, about what it's like to stitch arteries with mortars thudding just beyond the blast walls. I tell them the truth. War is loud. It's brutal, chaotic, merciless. But it is honest. You see the gun, you hear the explosion, you know where death comes from. There is no mystery about the source of pain. But what happened in that ER bay was different. Death came wearing perfume, and the word natural printed on a bottle. It came quietly, whispering through skin, turning a woman's body into a conduit for poison disguised as healing. That dishonesty, the betrayal of something meant to soothe, that's what still wakes me at night. I carry her daughter's face with me, the chipped blue nails clutched against her lips, asking me if her mother suffered. I carry the fisherman husband's hands, calloused and rough, holding that bottle like it was both a weapon and a prayer. I carry Drew, rubbing his throat in the autopsy room, and Diaz coughing quietly against his glove, and the sting in my own sinuses that felt like déjà vu from a war. One thought I had left behind. I carry the smell most of all. It lingers in places where it shouldn't. In the hospital corridor, when a cleaning cart passes. In the harbor air, when the fog rolls in off the Pacific. In my apartment at 3 a.m., when there is no reason for it. Memory is cruel. It doesn't need evidence to haunt you. The medical examiner's report gave us words but not answers. Acute respiratory failure with pulmonary edema, associated with suspected toxic exposure. Manner, undetermined. That last word, undetermined, cut deeper than any war wound. Because in medicine, you want closure. You want to trace the line from cause to effect. You want to believe that knowledge will shield you next time. But sometimes, the truth is this. The body keeps its secrets, and death does not always leave a signature. Since then, I have asked myself questions I don't want to answer. What other things slip through our hands, cloaked in good intentions? What remedies sit on bathroom shelves, promising health, carrying instead a chemistry experiment no one accounted for? How many more patients will arrive, not with bullets or blades, but with something invisible, creeping through skin and air? The ER has its own folklore now, its whispered cautionary tales. Some are about the traumas you can't unsee. Some are about the mistakes you pray you'll never repeat. And some, like hers, are about the mysteries you'll never solve, but will never forget. Stories that stay with you long after the monitors fall silent. I still scrub my hands longer than necessary after shifts. Diaz still keeps menthol under his nose when a case feels strange. Beecher still avoids jokes about oils and tinctures. And Tara, quiet Tara, sometimes glances at me during particularly long nights as if to say, "Do you smell it too?" There are nights I walk out of St. Gabriel's into the salt air, and I swear I taste it again, the solvent-sweet metallic tang riding the fog. It's never really there. But it doesn't matter. Some things follow you whether they exist or not. I've been a soldier. I've been a surgeon. I've seen the worst a battlefield can do. But nothing in my training, no tour in Afghanistan, no textbook, no night in the ER, prepared me for that case. And the truth I've come to accept is this. The case will always wait for me at the threshold between what we can explain and what we cannot.